important in this, right?
Well, good morning. You're listening to WXOX 97.1 FM in Louisville, Kentucky, or perhaps listening on our sister station, WXND 100.9, or online or through our handy dandy app where you can take us with you everywhere you go. This is Artist Talk with LVA, the show produced by Louisville Visual Art, and I'm your host, Keith Waits. And today we have an eminent guest who is now become an important figure in our city in the last few months. But we'll find out all sorts of things about him. Andrew and Andre, I'm starting off on the wrong foot. Andre Kimo Stone Guest is an internationally respected leader who has over 25 years of executive experience. He previously served as the CEO of the August Wilson Center for African American Culture in Pittsburgh, and he was the vice president and producer for Jazz at Lincoln Center in New York. He is now the president and CEO of the Louisville Fund for the Arts. Good morning, Andre. Welcome.
Oh, hey, how you doing? Thank you for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure, and sometimes people say like, "Oh, you should get Andre on. He just started a job," and I said, "Well, yeah, he just started the job. Let's wait until he's been here for a little bit, and he has some things to talk about more." But Andre, I want to start with looking at your background here, man. Besides the two things that showed up there, Jazz and Lincoln Center, there's a lot of other music. So was that your entrance into the arts? Were you a musician?
No, a lot of people think I was a musician, but my first sort of real, what I can remember as my foray into the arts, if you will, was I was 1972, so I must have been 6 years old. There was a Vines record shop on the corner of Broadway and Preston.
Yeah.
Front of it was, right in front of the Louisville Slugger factory that was there at the time.
Yeah.
I grew up on Jackson Street. So interestingly enough, people think, they're crazy when they say this now, but I used to walk up to that record store by myself.
Mhm.
My parents, it was a much gentler time back then. They was like, hey, your parents are crazy. They like the 6 year old walk up to Broadway to a record store. But I used to go there all the time and hang out. And Stevie Wonder's album Inner Vision, I bought with my own money in 1972. And I never it never occurred to me that I could be a musician or that was even an option for me. And I think that if it had been an option for me, I would have probably pursued music. But to me, it was like, well, maybe you could own a record store or something like that. So, but then, I ended up going to, throughout school, I went to Booker T. Washington Elementary, which is now Mazik. It was Mazik Junior High and Booker T. Washington Elementary School. And I went to Englehart and I went to Camera and I went to Mayo High School. So except for Camera, all my schools were in that, Smoketown sort of neighborhood, Englehart a little bit over more towards Old Louisville. But I it wasn't until I got into high school where the barbershop that I went to, Lloyd's Barbershop on Clay and Fenzer, I used to have to get there at least 2 hours before he came in the shop, or you'd be in there all night. So a line would form. So I would get there, and his father, who was like 85 years old, he and his old cronies would be listening to Phil Bailey on WFPL.
Oh
And
yeah. So
and I hated it. I was like, man, why y'all listening to that? Turn WLOU on. I'm like, put the R&B station on. I don't want to hear that. And they'd get to arguing and fighting over whether it was Coltrane or Sonny Rollins on saxophone. And I'm like, man, how can you tell who is on the saxophone? It's ridiculous. What you guys have too much time on your hands. And they schooled me into this music. And I remember the very first tune that I really liked was Gene Ammons' Red Top. That I really was like, I really like that tune. And then Leon, who was my barber, his father owned a shop. He was a trumpeter, so he introduced me to Wynton Kelly, which is the guy that Wynton Marsalis is named after. Because I knew of Wynton Marsalis, and I was trying to impress him because Wynton had been in the news as being more of a controversial figure than a musical figure. So I said, yeah, well, I know Wynton Marsalis is. Oh, he says, he's the other Wynton. The real Wynton is Wynton Kelly, and I had no idea. So he introduced me to Wynton Kelly, and my son's name is Wynton Kelly. I named my son Wynton Kelly, who is a pianist and a composer. So it kind of came full circle that the little boy that didn't know to be exposed to maybe taking lessons and becoming a musician, I made sure that my son was not only named after a jazz musician, but actually got lessons as a young man. And now, he's a classical composer.
Yeah, see, this is the joy of having somebody like you on a radio show like this is you just have to prick you and stories come out.
Yeah, you have to shut me
Great
up.
radio guess. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So, but did you, so you never tried to play or you just sort of became enamored of you just came engrossed in the
I,
music?
I mean, when I look back on it, it never occurred to me that was. I don't even know if it's a possibility. It was just I'm over here, the music is over there, right? And
Right.
so, but then when I got older, it was like, man, why didn't I play? Because I'm a mathematician, so I have a minored in actuarial math and did those actuarial exams. So there's a real close relationship
There
between
is.
mathematics and music and those kinds of things. So I think it's inside of me. And so now I am going to start taking piano lessons as an old man. But yeah, if I was asked on a panel last night, they showed a picture of me when I was in the first grade. They said, "What's the advice that you would give to your younger self?" I said, "Well, other than find a way to not lose all that hair you got, I would say take piano lessons, young man. Take piano lessons."
Well, and of course now you have an array of great musicians in town to help give you pointers. Pick it up. I mean, Teddy
Yeah.
Abrams could probably give you a lesson.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna start. I'm gonna make my son who lives in Lisbon. I said, anytime he's in town, he's gotta give me lessons. Maybe I'll start some Zoom lessons and torture him for all the times he made me sit in traffic, taking him back and forth to his lessons.
Well, I think you could also make this a whole fun campaign. Andre learns piano,
Yeah.
and build a whole. But so let's focus in on Louisville a little bit. We could probably spend
Hmm?
hours talking about all these
Oh
different.
yeah.
You've been New Orleans and Philadelphia and New York City Opera. I mean, you've been all over the place, man. But let's focus in on Louisville. So you born and raised here. You went to University of Louisville. Went out and had all this experience. Then were you already back here, or did you come back for this job? What
Well,
was the story of you coming back?
so it's interesting, and so I never after I left Jazz and Lincoln Center in 2000, really 2007, late 2006. It was in the year, so I was there for 7 years. Gilly got burnt out because being in New York is like dog years, man. It's like 49 years I was there. And so I started my own art, my own sort of one person consulting firm, was doing consulting work, subcontract work a lot, and some other stuff with some of those folks that you named. And then I started an artist management business. My wife and I started managing the careers of these world class jazz musicians. But then I was on a consulting project in Pittsburgh in 2010 when the job for the August Wilson Center came available. It was like my second or third once in a lifetime opportunity. And so I decided to throw my name in the hat, and I did. I got a 2 year contract. And then, I didn't think that I'd ever go back and work in an institution again. And then about a year into it, I was like, man, what am I doing? you know, uh, and so it was a shock to the system. It was a heavy lift. I enjoyed my time there and got a lot of important lessons and hopefully left back some things there as well that they could build upon. But at the end of that 2 years, my wife and I, we kind of looked at each other like, we're not going to stay here. We're not going to go back to New York. And I stupidly asked the question, well, where are we going to go? And she looked at me and she says, what do you mean we're going home? And I was like, well, I don't want to go home. And she said, well, I didn't want to move to New York, so we're even. So in 2012, me moved back to Louisville, and I'm not gonna lie, I came back here kicking and screaming because my arrogant, big-headed self thought that Louisville could not contain me. I'm the man of the world. I'm flying all over the world. Why do I want to go back to Louisville? And so the only solace for me at the time was the fact that I was still traveling significantly with my clients. So I was gone 150 some odd days a year, really only sleeping here, living in St. Matthews, walking to Trader Joe's and Whole Foods. But just go to hunkering down in my apartment while I was in town. And I had actually convinced my wife that in 2019, that in 2021, we would move to New Orleans. And when our youngest daughter graduated from college. She graduated from Berea College in 2021. And then the pandemic happened, and then Breonna Taylor happened, and then George Floyd happened. And, I felt horrible in the same way that I'm sure everyone listening to this felt horrible at the time, but I felt horrible for a different reason because I felt like I'd really turned my back on my city. And all of the things that I am are a direct result of being here, even though I left and got some experience. And so we decided to stay. We ended up buying our forever home, which is a condo here on St. James Court. And I got back to consulting very heavily and was, and really said, God, you've blessed me with a lot of experience, a lot of opportunities. Just show me what it is that you want me to do in terms of getting back involved, because I was very involved before I left. And someone sent me the job description for the Fund for the Arts, and Katina Whitlock sent it to me in LinkedIn. And I looked at it as a providential thing because I never go on LinkedIn. And one day I just happened to be on LinkedIn because a friend of mine, you get those things from LinkedIn where someone such and such is waiting for your, reply,
Yeah.
right? And I didn't want that person thinking, well, Andre's ignoring me, right? So I go, okay, I'll go accept it. And I go on there and then there's this inbox message and there it is. So I read this job description and the posting for it. And I looked at all the things that the fund had done and what it was looking to do. And I saw that they had an equity and diversity push in 2017, 2018, which was a full 2 years before it was in vogue to do so. And I was like, wow, they're serious about this. And it was as if that job description had been written with my experience in mind.
Mhm.
And I said, wow, this is what you should be doing. And I went in and told my wife, I just applied for a job. And the first question was, where? We just bought this place. What are you doing? I said, it's, and then after that, she says, a job? You want a job? I was like, yeah, it's here. It's in Louisville. It's Fun for the Arts. And so to this day, she still can't believe that I'm doing this, but I'm having a ball.
Well, it's interesting. It's a great story you tell, but what strikes me is that I know a lot of people who have gone away and come back to Louisville. That's a very common narrative. But then I also think about how a lot of times when a job like the leader of the fund, it comes up. It's like an important job. It's a high profile job, and there's a history in Louisville of always looking to outsiders, bring in a
Yeah,
talent from outside.
right,
And so it's like with
right.
you, we've got both a native and
and
a guy with all this experience in other cities and with all these organizations.
and Keith, to be honest with you, when I looked at, because having been in Pittsburgh in a high profile job and not being from that city, there were some challenges for me there. And so when I looked at what it is that I thought was possible in this job, I knew there were a few things, a few boxes that I checked. Number one, from equity and diversity standpoint, that the fund um, was really serious about that. I knew as a black man that I could make a big dent in that. But more importantly, because I was from here.
Hmm.
And I have a family history here that goes back to the early 1900s in a very important black enclave in Smoketown, the first settlement. So for mythologically, in terms of the narrative, the kind of things where you can get on programs like this and tell a story where people don't know you, it's like, wow, that makes sense, right? And art is about storytelling, so it's about making the story make sense so that it can actually get to and be what it needs to be. And so I thought about that. I thought about the fact also that there are some people who, I could have learned everything that I know right now without having ever sort of left Louisville to live, and it wouldn't be as appreciated as
Hmm.
my resume is having not left and not lived here. So you're right; it's a little bit of that's the best of both worlds. So I figured, taking all of that, somebody could have twice the experience I have in international arts, but not be from here, and then have an uphill battle. So it was a perfect storm, if you will, which is why it made so much sense to me for me to throw my name in the hat.
Well, I think about you makes me think about Teddy Abrams moving here from outside and what he did that I think was so important was that as you know, I don't even know if he knows how to drive. He rides a bike everywhere.
Right, right.
He biked all over the city. He stopped in every place. He made friends. He really that was one of the first things he did that I think was so crucial to his success here is he got to know the city on sort of a
Yeah.
on a ground level.
Yeah.
Grassroots.
He's like, I may not be from here, but I want to be of here.
Yeah.
And I am here. And that's really important to creating a sense of community and a sense of belonging that you're seen. People need to see you.
Right. Well, so let's talk about the fund a little bit. The fund, and I don't know about that. I know there are other such organizations in other cities. Our fund, I believe, was one of the first ones, though, in the
Well,
United
it's
States.
between us and Cincinnati,
Yeah.
and there's some technicalities in there, but I always say so. Our actual official language says we're one of the two oldest United Arts funds in the country. But if you go to our building, 6th and Main, there's one of those old metal plates on the building that says we're the oldest United Arts Fund. Well, for the purposes of this call, I'm going to say we're the oldest, because that if the plate says it's the oldest, I'm going to say we're the oldest. So yes, we are the oldest United Arts Fund in the country. Started in 1949. It's when Mayor Farnsley and a group of individuals got in. I always imagine it as this smoke-filled room, right?
Yeah.
uh, and got together and decided they wanted to raise some money for the arts organizations in the city, and they raised $99,000. And I'm sure you know this, that Louisville Visual Arts was one of the recipients of some of that money.
Yeah, we were there. I think we were called the Arts Center Association at the time.
Yeah,
Yeah, I believe the name. I mean, I've gone through our history, but I
yeah.
think that we were at the time. But yes,
Yeah.
we're
You
proud.
can, yeah, you guys are one of the oldest organizations. So we're having a conversation in our own sort of virtually smoke-filled room. So we're sort of as a throwback to that in
But our
1949.
air is clear. Our air is clear, at least. So it seems like such for the time that must have been just a radical idea. But now that it's been around for so long, and when you talk about you coming into it and what you thought you could bring to it, is what is the most important thing for the fund right now, besides the raising the money, which is there, it's historical, that's the legacy that's been going on for a long time. But is it that diversity and equity idea and pushing that in and helping other organizations maybe?
Well, I think to me, I think the most important aspect is somewhat of a paradigmatic shift in the way that the arts are sort of viewed, not in the way that the arts actually are, because the arts, arts just are. The Latin phrase "ars longa vita brevi," art is long, life is short. So it's our whole thing about art is just, it is what it is. But if you think about, you go back to 1949, there was a movement afoot to say, hey, there are these arts organizations that we need to support. And those arts organizations do something that's good for the city, that's good for the people of the city, right? And the traditional pitch for a United Arts Fund, like ourselves, is that we have these arts organizations that we raise money for. They're the crown jewels of the city, and they make a city proud. They make a city vibrant. You can or should be a part of them. But even if you don't want to be a part of them or can't be a part of them, you should support them, because there are yellow school buses outside of them. So your kids can take a part of it, right? But that pitch doesn't really speak to you, right? It talks about the organizations and it kind of talks about your children, but it doesn't talk about you. And so one of the things that we're focusing on is that you can't create, in my humble opinion, a sense of belonging starting at the macro. You can't have Louisville, Louisville Visual Arts, neighborhood, family, individual. You can't create belonging that way, in my opinion. If you start at the individual and then go out to the family and friends and then go to the neighborhood or the community and then go to the organization and then go to the city, you have a better chance of creating a sense of belonging, particularly when you don't look at it, you look at it concentrically, but not discretely, that it's more of a spiral, because and it's a continuum. And I used to talk about concentric circles all the time until I saw the documentary on Hilma af Klint and all the spirals that she was doing in her abstract work. And I was like, the continuum of the spiral, must incorporate that into my storytelling. So so what we're doing is we're sort of changing the focus of how we deal with the arts from more of a city and institution focus to an individual focus, right? Because the fact of the matter is, every person on the planet creates and consumes art every day. They just may not realize that they do so, right? And so we're not trying to create a world where everybody creates and consumes art. We're trying to create a world where everyone's aware that they create and consume art every day.
Right. Even a billboard can
Yes,
be, not always, but
yes,
it could be.
yeah, yeah,
And certainly all of the streaming content,
yeah,
we know that, just as with the history of television, much of it is junk, but much of it is
yeah,
quality.
yeah.
So let me ask you a little bit. Let's go back to your return to the city. And thinking here about the arts community, not the overall city, and but so what surprised you coming back to Louisville? What surprised you most about the city that you didn't expect to find when you came back?
Um, I don't, I guess in one regard, as much as it was different, it was really the same.
Mm.
And I think, but I had a different appreciation for it now because your your biggest weakness can be your biggest strength if applied in the right way. And let me tell you what I mean by that. Louisville is, I think Louisville has always constrained itself in terms of what it wanted to be, right? I think the city is like, I don't want to be this big because there's some, and you can go back to the decision to not have the Delta hub here way back when, right? Because if that would have happened, we could be Atlanta, right? And you think about where we sit, we're sort of centrally located between Indianapolis to the north, Nashville to the south, Cincinnati to the east, and St. Louis to the west. And we're like, each one of those cities has their own distinct thing, and we have a little bit of all of them, in who we sort of are. And so now to that, I say that Louisville, because it is the size that it is, and because it is structured the way that it is, there is a a small group of individuals, institutions, organizations that if they decide to do something, it can get done.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true in a lot of cities, right? I don't care who you are in some cities, go to New York and try to do something. And it can't get done. So now, whereas in the past, those decisions with that small group may not have been the most inclusive, the most equitable, and decisions and diverse decisions made on behalf of the entire city. But I am very optimistic that given that group and given everything that's happened in the city, that there is an appetite to move things forward in a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive way. And I'm very fortunate to be a part of, at least for the arts anyway, at the table and being one of the leaders in facilitating that discussion.
Okay. Well, then, you.
Sorry, my daughter didn't know I was on.
This the world of Zoom, if a dog comes in barking, I'm all good with it. That's just so let me ask you this too, then, and maybe you were sort of. That sounds really good. So, what disappointed you? What did you come back and say? Like, oh man.
I think how much work actually needs to be done. Mm-hmm. Because in reality, I've been gone for 20 years. Because when I got back in 2012, and I'm serious when I say this, people thought my wife had left me and come back because they never saw me. Like, folks were trying to fix my wife up with people. They were like, "Where's Andre? I thought you left him in New York or Pittsburgh." Because I was gone so much, and like I said, I never left the apartment, and I didn't even watch the local news. I literally was hiding in plain sight. And so, in terms of what was going, and I may have gone downtown less than once a year in those 8 years. I was going from St. Matthews down 264 to the airport and back, and then walking to Trader Joe's and Whole Foods. That was my extent of my travel. So when I looked at that in many ways that the city was worse, particularly from a segregation and racial standpoint, it was when I left in 2000. Mm-hmm. And part of the reasons, and I'm very transparent about this, and part of the reason that I left because the life that I wanted for myself and my children, I didn't feel like I could get here. And I didn't want to raise my children here. because I didn't want them to develop a an unhealthy sense of self that I could not control for them when they were younger. Thankfully, because they were raised in New York, in their formative years, and they were around art all the time, they developed a highly in the art, with jazz, with musicians, and we went to galleries and things. So they saw people and met artists, and people came over to the house that looked like them, and the art on the wall looked like them. They developed a very positive sense of self that would not have been possible here. And I'm very transparent and honest when I say that if my children were 7, 4, and 1, which is how they were when I left, and I were here now, I'd leave again because the city is still not there. And so the question is now my children have all grown up, and except for my oldest daughter, uh, my younger three have all left. And so I don't have the responsibility of their well-being on me now. And so now I'm cool and living, what I consider to be the best one block of residential real estate in the entire country. Uh, and I get a chance to wake up every day and move the needle on something I care so much about. But I know there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm doing everything I can to help make this city, not just from an equity, diversity, and inclusion standpoint, but this city in general, to have a sense of belonging, for everyone to belong, so it becomes a place where I would be more than proud to have my children's children be a part of. It's not there yet.
Right. Well, do you think that this is the question I think is on the minds of a lot of people in Louisville is, the Breonna Taylor murder is a terrible tragedy, but
Yeah.
it seems to have, that it does seem to have shaken things up and woken people up, and it's still sort of a controversial topic when you talk about
Yeah.
the extremes of the viewpoints. So it feels like we're in a moment of possible change that's
Hmm.
happened as a result of that. That's hopefully the silver lining is that there's you hate to think of it that way, but it's
Yeah.
sometimes that's exactly the kind of event that really does
Yeah.
change. Do you feel like whatever change we're undergoing can be substantive and continue, or do you think that it will fade easily?
Well, I think the uh, attention from it, and the being prescient in the front of the mind will go away. That's just natural because something else will come, right? That occupies our consciousness. But I do believe that there is a general sentiment around the city of we are not well as a community. And that was a significant contributor to that unwellness, if I will. And then it's COVID on top of that is just, that has made it. And we've got another pandemic that's upon us, the tsunami of which is, the mental health pandemic that's coming from the isolation and all the other stuff that goes along with the trauma, the isolation, all of it. So, um, even if it is not something that stays in the forefront of people's minds about that we need to do something about this, if those folks, as I mentioned before, of which now I am at the table, are intentional about putting in things that are systemic in nature to address these things. And we stay on the course, whether or not it is in vogue at the moment to continue to do so, then we got a chance.
Well, I've seen a lot of art, and even before Breonna Taylor, a lot of things that are shifting. Things like I've seen productions of three Dominic Morisseau plays in Louisville in the last
Mm,
5 years, and I think she's one of the most important playwrights in America, and she looks exactly at all these kinds of issues,
mm,
and so I see things that's just one example,
yeah,
and I see people like Hannah Drake. I was at
yeah,
the ballet last night. I don't know, you might have been in the audience too. And it seems like somebody like Hannah Drake has I can remember when she was very dismissive and
Right,
self-deprecating. She was just a punk or whatever, and now she's
right.
like this voice.
Yeah, she's owning her voice.
And I think people are paying attention to it and they are listening to it. And of course, I hope that that's not just like
Right. And-
performative or an acknowledgement, and then you kind of move
right,
on.
right, right.
That
Well,
that it seems like art is really playing its role right now.
yeah, it is. I mean, it's challenging, and I think that art is whether we realize it or not, it is the thing that we use to make sense of the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
It is the thing that we use to help us cope. It is those things. So I think as a recognition of that aspect of it, as medicine, as wellness, as food, as a lifeline, as water, as nourishment. But and also to go back a little bit about what it is about the things that we can do to sort of move the needle on our wellness individually and work along that continuum out. It's like I'm well, my family's well, my community's well, my neighborhood's well, my institutions are well, and my city is well. Is you know there's nothing more frustrating than when you understand a problem to be a problem. You both, if you're looking at another person, you both want to do everything you can to solve that problem. But the thing that one is asking the other to do, they're either not capable of doing or not willing to do. So I think the work for those of us that stand in the institutions is to do the hard work of matchmaking the folks understanding what people's can do easily and are willing to do with the need. And so if I know, so it's not always money. And to me, the most precious resource that we have as human beings is time. So if I can call you and say, hey, I need you to do this on this day for this amount of time, and these are the 5 things I need you to do, and you can do them easily
Mm-hmm.
or without a lot of toil, and you can see how it fits into something larger to move the needle, boom, you're willing to do that. But if I call you and ask you to do something or to write a check or something that is outside of the bounds of what you can do, we both walk away from that sad, upset, dismissive. So it's really about maybe we need sort of artistic and organizational Tinder, right? It's sweet swiping the opportunities with the people who can do them.
It's actually a brilliant idea. I think. Um, well, so let me, and that reminds me of this question. I've heard some people say that organizations like the fund, I'm not going to say who, has asked the question. The organizations like the fund have sort of like they're sort of a thing of the past. Like they did their job. That at a time in the middle of the 20th century, right? They helped elevate the arts and culture in a community. They helped bring cohesiveness to that support line from the community. But now that they've accomplished that, they've taken these organizations and helped educate and teach them how to take care of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is there really a need for something like the Fund for the Arts or any other sort of central fundraising organization? So, what do you respond? How do you respond to that sort of question?
Well, we just revamped our vision, mission, and values, and our mission now is we contribute to the overall health and well-being of our community by generating resources for, investing in, and supporting artists, and arts organizations. Okay, and so there is the arts are not a capitalistic marketplace,
Right.
meaning that if the thing, if I make a widget and I come to the marketplace and no one buys it, then there must not be a need for it
Mm-hmm.
or whatever, right? And so that's, art, the arts don't compete on that level. Art is. And so what it is really about is creating a marketplace of ideas. It's not even about the money. And I think that any community needs some level of an agnostic body who is looking to do those things, those three. And we've, over time have sort of gotten to this place where it's like we generate the resources, we invest, and we support, right? And so it's about, because there's also in any market now, economists, and I have an undergrad degree in economics, so I'm gonna put my economist hat on. So
you're all about numbers in your
right. Economists will say that that rational decisions, you have efficient markets and so forth. So there's an efficiency in the market that is generated by in capitalism by human greed, if you will. But there's inefficiencies in artistic markets, meaning that there is matching someone's expression, not for somebody to buy it, but if I am creating something that's helping me bring my artistic expression to the world, it's self-soothing me. So it serves a purpose for me because I got to guess, like I just gave birth to it. It's something that I'm doing. There's someone who benefits from the joy of that child that's helping them in a different way. Doesn't mean they need to buy the painting or whatever it might be. I think the job of organizations like ours is to facilitate a framework where those connections can be made. I think it is tender, Keith. I mean, it's like this thing was sweet with swap.
Well, and I think right there you justify your whole existence. Happen, man. I'm telling you, and you could market that, but
yeah. But it is really about making sure that we because we fly at the 10,000 foot. We try to understand and be agnostic about not making any judgment calls about what should and shouldn't happen. We're not producing any art, but we're looking like, because we're having these conversations like, oh, this is going on over here, and oh, that is going on over here, and this is going on over there. And we also want individuals and neighborhoods to self-identify the things that mean to them, because there's not a one-size-fits-all situation where you're bringing art from the public square into the neighborhoods. It might not fit into that neighborhood, or maybe if it does fit, it fits in a way that deals with the cultural values of that neighborhood in a collaboration with an artist or arts organization in that neighborhood. So those are the kinds of things that we're trying to do, the matchmaking, to understand that these three organizations, it may not be an efficient investment to invest in any one of them individually, but it may be an effective one to bring them together and invest in them collectively.
Well, it's interesting how people view the fund. When I came back to Louisville, which was in 2006, because I'm also a native, and I spent years somewhere else, not doing the kind of cool stuff you were doing. But, and I started working at Louisville Visual Art again, where I had worked for 2 years back in the 80s. And somebody I was talking to, as I got to know different people in the arts community, somebody said like, oh, well, you guys don't talk about money. You're in the fund. You guys are taken care of, and I was like, really? And I think there is that perception when you're outside of whatever the financial bubble of the fund. Like the fund is a security, it is a lifeline. But I don't know everybody's budgets, but I know that it doesn't fully fund anything.
No.
Yeah, much larger.
Yeah, and it is. I mean, it was because, think about it, let's go back to 1949. I don't know. I should know this, but I don't know how many organizations were actually funded out of that $99,000. But it was a finite small group, right? And all the way up until the tens, 2010 or whatever, it was still a pretty much small finite group of organizations that were doing that. Kristen Boone came in and changed the and put the equity model in, and so now we're looking at something different. And so now we really are looking to be more, not that we weren't before, but systemically becoming more of a, we, as I said, generate resources, invest in and support, but from a framework standpoint, which is, like we do 5x5, which is what 5x5 is, but our listeners may not. We want, elementary school kids to have 5 experiences by the time they're in the 5th grade. Arts experiences. So we have this menu of arts teachers and arts organizations that these teachers choose from. You all are in that book, and in essence, the teachers flip through the book and say, "Oh, I want Louisville Visual Arts to come and work with our kids," and they choose you, and then you do it, and we pay you. And so that model of matchmaking where there is somewhere where art can be applied, like say in neighborhoods, for instance,
Mhm.
at a community center or something, we're looking to build that type of infrastructure, whereas you decide what you want to do with your people in your neighborhood. That's an expression of who you are as a neighborhood. Hopefully you would use artists and arts organizations in your neighborhood, but to the extent that you would need or have support from organizations who do these kind of things at a different level, like Louisville Visual Arts or the orchestra or ballet or whatever, that there could be some level of collaboration, and we'll fund that. And it'll happen, it'll get funded. And so we stand in the middle as the matchmaker.
So
Oh,
it comes right back around to what you were talking about earlier about moving off that sort of institutional support model, but
yeah.
but you're not leaving the institutions behind. You're just
Well,
kind of inviting them to come out and maybe interact differently.
and think of it this way, right? Because most, and this isn't just in Louisville, almost every arts institution that's a 501c3, one of the main ways that they're able to, to get donations, at least grants from foundations, is to do education,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, and outreach. But no one institution can do outreach throughout a city well, because you don't have the resources to know the city. What those organizations do is they develop relationships where they can, or where they pop up, or where people self-identify, and they keep going back, and they become comfortable and they get into those relationships that they've had. Now, an organization like us can be very intentional about going out into the entire city and trying to understand and build a framework for that decision to be made at that level, right, in the neighborhood, and then bring the menu to the neighborhood for folks. So I guess we're DoorDash. I mean, look, I mean, it's Tinder, we're DoorDash. I mean, what's going on here?
I love that. And so now we have an idea where maybe get a request and you call up and you say, Keith, I need an artist. I need an artist to work here now. In 30 minutes.
Exactly, right. There's a 10 foot by 10 foot wall on the side of this restaurant that needs a mural by next Thursday.
I know exactly the artist for that. Uh, I
Right.
know a few because it's hard to do that fast, but I know a couple that probably could.
Yeah. So
Let
I
them,
mean, I
you
mean,
let
we
them
joke, but if we, you create this kind of a framework, I think that those are because they'd probably never think to call you in the first place. But if you create a framework of how they can facilitate it, then you can make the match.
Well, and I don't want to let this moment pass without you mentioned, Kristen Boone and that I remember the moment you were talking about, which was about 4 years ago, something like that. I don't know,
I think
but
it was around 2018 or so. Yeah.
yeah, because suddenly, and I found out about it by walking into a production of Pandora Productions, and there were these fund banners and all this stuff. I'm going like, hey, what's going on? And Michael Drury was like, well, we're announcing tonight. We're announcing this tonight, and I had not heard about it. And I think it's something that I don't think a lot of people understood, except those companies and their close family of followers, how there was that moment where nine organizations were invited to come in to be a part of I'm not sure how you would say, but they were the organizations that receive sustaining grants or that are
Yeah,
eligible
sustaining what they're called the SIG
for SIG.
pool, the sustaining endpoint grant recipients.
But right. But when you say SIG, it's like, we get to talk. It's almost like the military. You start using all these acronyms.
Yeah. What are they talking about?
Nobody knows what we're talking about. But I remember like, wow, that's incredible, and I wanted to write about it for my blog, and I called up somebody at the fund who is no longer there, terrific person, but Kat Abner, and
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
and I said, hey, can I talk to you about this? I want to write something about it. And she said, sure. And I said, I think this is a big deal, and I'm surprised. Like, why isn't there more press about this? This is a big deal. This is a really strong, positive move on the part of the fund. And why is nobody kind of getting excited about it the way I would imagine that they would? I want to write about it. And for example, I'm trying to remember the last time I could track that an organization had been invited in like that. And I
Mhm.
said, when was the last time that an organization invited in? And she said, we're not sure. We don't have any record of the last time. It has been a while, you know.
Yeah,
But those organizations were chosen for their diversity and equity and inclusion.
yeah.
to really, they were representing on their own as a part of the mission and doing very well at it, and that's why they were invited in. So,
Yes.
I always feel like that moment never got its due.
Yeah, and every chance I get, I give the flowers and the recognition to Kristen and the board at the time for doing what they did, because I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but if I had read that job description and that work had not taken place, I wouldn't apply for the job. And because they were doing it, but like I said before, it was in vogue to do it, and she took a lot of flack for that, and she got a lot of scar tissue from that move because it wasn't popular. Because anytime you sort of open up what can be seen as an exclusive club, if you will, to let others in, and when those other ones don't necessarily look like the other ones, and there's joy on one side, and there may or may not. I mean, I wasn't there, so I don't know, but there may or may not have been consternation on the other side. But I know the process of any type of change is not always, there's growing pains inside of doing that. And I know that it wasn't the smoothest process for her in the big scheme of things, and change never is. So I stand on her shoulders, and trying to move what the work that she's done in it, and for whatever the next phase might be.
Well, change is always a little messy. That's why status quo is what it is.
Yeah,
People would rather
yeah,
stand still
right.
than move forward. Well, Andre, this has been great to talk to you again. You're a great radio guest, man. You
Yeah.
can talk. Love it.
Yeah. I mean, that's just because I just like to run my mouth, right, and tell stories. So that's why I say I'm a storyteller. So you ask me a
All,
question, I'll tell a story.
all art storytelling, like
Yeah,
you said.
I believe that 100%.
And
Absolutely.
it's a cliche to say it, but it's the whole thing
Yeah.
about when they dig up our civilization in 5,000 years, that's how they'll know about us.
I say that all the time. I say that I said the only way we know about what happened in the past is not because somebody sat in the corner and wrote exactly what they did, is because we made an interpretation of the art that they made and the artifacts that were there, and we wrote a story, and that story is not 100% true, but gets mythologized as such.
Right. Will our story be? You know what? I already know plays that have tried to address that question, so it's already on the minds of
Yeah.
artists. Well, Andre, thank you so much for joining me today. Andre Guess, the president and CEO of the Louisville Fund for the Arts. We will have you back. Let's see. So this was a what? This has been about 7 months in, 8 months in.
Yeah.
Maybe we can have you back a little bit later and see if you're still loving
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Then you're like, well, man, I know, I get to complain and no, but like I said, I don't have to do this work. I get to do it, and I wake up. I wake up every morning with a smile on my face because of the opportunity to do so. So,
Well, good enough. That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks.
thank you.